Good morning, Southeast Minnesota. It's May 27th, and this is episode 26. Allie, coming out of a long weekend here, and a couple highlights that kind of took place over the weekend. Number one, finally got some heat. And number two, I kind of felt like it might have been our first warm rain of the season, and driving around a little bit, yesterday and Monday, while the crop really changed a lot from where it was just 5-6 days ago.
Yeah, it kind of felt like last week we thought some of that heat and sunshine was going to come on a little bit more than it did. So we were just waiting for that to come. And then, like you said, I think that heat and then that appearingly warm rain over the weekend really worked wonders for not only the crop, but you talk about driving around, you can just tell that everything else in general has really fully greened up. Even some folks' lawns are really progressing too. So that's always kind of a nice gauge of what things are doing across the area. But
Yeah, and looking at, finally getting some warm weather, and I've had a few questions around kind of where we're sitting GDU-wise. Allie, you got some data out of Preston?
yeah, so ran this data out of Preston, just where we sit in terms of GDUs. So to date, we're at about 271. So this is just 7 below the normal where we'd sit this time of the year. And then for the next 14 days, we're projecting to hit about 527 GDUs. So we're going to really start pushing this crop along here. So you look at, if we make it to 527 in the next 14 days, you're easily going to be close to V6 on corn. So between this week and the weeks to come, we're really going to start seeing some significant change in the crop stage, which I know we've been doing some drone work with stand counts. So we'll be pretty busy working in some of these with some of that, just in terms of the compressed planting windows that we've had across the area.
Yeah, and that's from an April 20th start date. And just looking at a little comparison there too, we're pretty close to average. We're just, like you said, short 7, well ahead of last year, 2019, a little behind 2018, but trending better. And I do see some warm days in the forecast, a little cool off here late week, but overall definitely trending the right way. Allie, one big thing that kind of came up really the last 2 weeks has been, number one, boy, it took the corn a long time to emerge, and the soybeans for that said, and been a little concerned about, is the corn crop going to be really uneven within the field? In some cases, some pockets of the field were emerged sooner. Within some rows, we've seen some variability in emergence. Any thoughts as you made the rounds last week, what you thought about that?
Yeah, I'd say that was probably one of the, in terms of service calls I went on last week, that was the number one thing that kept coming up. So I think prior to that rainfall that we had this past week, we really were pretty dry on that upper inch, like I said, prior to that rain. So there was just really little forgiveness for some of those shallower seeding depths. And I think in my case, whether it be beans or corns, as I was out making those observations in terms of some plants were a little farther along, some were just emerging, a lot of that seemed to attribute back to where folks were sitting planting depth wise. So I know an example out of one of the cornfields I was in had a plant that was a little closer to V1 versus one that was just maybe spiking through. The difference there was that corn plant that was farther along had a deeper planting depth. The one that was just poking through had a shallower planting depth. And in my opinion, that comes back to where that seed was in terms of where it was sitting moisture-wise in that soil. And then I think there's also, with those dry conditions, just comes some of that variation in soil temperature from field to field. But would be curious to get your take on maybe what you attribute to some of that unevenness.
Yeah, that was just an extremely common question, and it's twofold. The first thing is I went out and spent a lot of time with growers the last 5-6 days. Some of the uneven emergence, maybe not as bad as I thought it would be. And in most cases, Allie, we just want to keep everything within 2 collars. And most of the stuff I walked in, we're going to stay within a collar or even a half a collar. It's maybe not as uneven as maybe it appears to be. I think the other perception is we planted in such just perfect conditions all spring. I think expectations where stands would be, perfect because conditions were so good. But the challenge was, not getting our first warm rain till now and really not having a measurable rain throughout the planting season. We just never really got, the soil temperatures balanced out and stabilized. And I think the unevenness is just coming from, too dry of soil, which cold can penetrate in a lot of airspace. And every night, really during planting season, we were dipping down into the low 40s, if not high 30s in the soil temp. And that just led to just extremely variable soil temps across the field. And a lot of years, if you just don't get that rain, partway through the planting season to stabilize that, it's just something we kind of deal with. One other thing I saw too is, some plants as they grew, you could tell they found cold at the surface. They kind of grew a little sideways and then up, and that's just a situation where they got a little confused about which way to grow to warmth. And that was just a common thing that was out there. And the one thing about this season that anyone that, like you mentioned, had shallow planting, it just exposed that situation probably more so than I've ever seen, where a couple situations we had to actually do a little replanting because we just couldn't get the seeds to imbibe, and our emergence was going to be so variable, where in some cases we had seeds sitting there 10, 12 days that hadn't even germinated or hadn't even swelled up yet, which was just creating a lot of challenges. But I will say, to kind of summarize the first segment, I think the unevenness of the corn is maybe not as bad as it some of us may think it was be. As I made the rounds, I think we're still going to be in good shape. And in segment 2, we'll roll into some other things as we turn the calendar close to the month of June here.